there is a very specific kind of math that only makes sense inside the brain of someone with too much money and too much pride. Normal people calculate risk. Rich people calculate insults. And the biggest insult, the one they cannot psychologically tolerate, the one that will override every survival instinct they possess, is paying a professional $52 to do something they are absolutely, completely, 100% certain they can do themselves for free. These are not stories about poverty. These are not stories about desperate people making desperate choices. These are stories about people with enough money in their checking account to buy a small country who died, fully, permanently, and with extraordinary commitment, over amounts of money that would not have covered their monthly parking fee. 10 millionaires. 10 amounts you would not bend over to pick up off the ground. 10 physics lessons they really should have hired someone to take for them. And before we get into it, number 8 sounds like something a screenwriter invented to make a point. Nobody invented it. The credential she had makes this one of the most structurally perfect disasters we have ever documented. We checked her thesis. It existed. That is all we are saying for now. Your only homework tonight is this. Do not let your ego write checks that your structural integrity cannot cash. Number 1. The foyer of Marcus Bellingham's Connecticut estate was the kind of ice space that architects photograph for portfolios and guests photograph for Instagram. 14-foot ceilings. Imported Italian marble flooring. A chandelier that had cost more than most people's cars. And on the morning of November 14th, one single bulb in that chandelier had burned out. 1. Marcus noticed it at 6:47 a.m. while having his morning coffee, which cost $11 a cup. He called no one. He got a ladder. Marcus was 53 years old, had a net worth of approximately $41 million, and had built that fortune in commercial real estate, which means he had personally overseen the construction of 17 buildings, and had signed approximately 4,000 contracts containing the phrase, licensed and insured professionals only. He understood risk management. He had given speeches about risk management. He had a framed poster in his office that said, "Risk is the tax you pay on opportunity," which, in retrospect, was doing a lot of prophetic heavy lifting. The bulb cost $3.49. Marcus had a housekeeper, a groundskeeper, and a property manager. He had a handyman on monthly retainer, a very reasonable $200 a month, whose entire job description included the phrase, light bulb replacement, including high-access fixtures. Marcus had not called him. In Marcus's mind, the handyman was for complicated things. This was not complicated. This was just a bulb. In his mind, the hard part was already over. He had already located the ladder in the garage, which had taken 11 minutes and involved moving a kayak he had not used in 4 years now. Gravity, for those of you keeping score, is not a suggestion. It is not a preference. It is not something that takes your net worth or your Forbes profile into consideration before making decisions. Gravity applies 32 feet per second squared of acceleration to every falling object, regardless of whether that object has a real estate empire. From a height of 11 feet, which is approximately where Marcus was standing on that ladder, a human body reaches Italian marble in just under 0.83 seconds. The impact force at that speed, for a man of Marcus's 211-pound frame, delivers approximately 200 pounds of force to whatever part of him lands first. That marble, for its part, had not moved in 12 years, and had absolutely no intention of compromising now. The ladder was a 6-foot aluminum model. Marcus was using it fully extended, on a floor that had been cleaned with a slightly too generous wax polish the previous Thursday. He had not opened the locking spreaders all the way. He had noticed they were slightly stiff. He had thought, "It's fine. I'll only be up here for 30 seconds." He was almost certainly thinking about how impressed he would be with himself when he came back downstairs with the old bulb in his hand. The whole thing would take maybe 2 minutes. He would put the ladder away. He would finish his coffee. No fuss, no contractor invoice, no waiting around for someone to arrive between 10 and 2. Just Marcus solving a simple problem with the decisive efficiency that had made him $41 million. Gravity logged back on at 6:52 a.m. The ladder went right. Marcus went left. He did not catch the chandelier, which at $34,000 could have absorbed the moment with grace, if not for the fact that the chain mount was not rated for a lateral 211-pound load. He also did not catch the railing, which was 8 feet away. He caught the marble. Specifically, the back of his skull caught the marble with all 4,200 of those pounds of force. And Marcus Bellingham, commercial real estate developer, risk management enthusiast, owner of a handyman on monthly retainer, became the most expensive outcome of a 349's light bulb in the history of Connecticut. The handyman arrived on his regular monthly visit 4 days later and replaced the bulb. It took him 6 minutes. He sent the usual $200 invoice. Nobody paid it. Real talk for 2 seconds. Any job requiring a ladder above 8 feet needs a spotter and confirmed non-slip footing, not optimism, not haste. A spotter and verified surface grip. That is the whole lesson. Now back to people who skipped that class entirely. That one had physics working quietly in the background. Our next one had electricity, and electricity does not work quietly. It expresses its opinions loudly, immediately, and with a very specific kind of finality that leaves no room for the second attempt. Number 2, Hamburg, Germany. Mid-February. Wolfgang Reinhold, 61, former CEO of a mid-sized logistics company, currently enjoying a retirement his accountant had once described as aggressively comfortable. The man had 8.3 million euros in various accounts, a primary residence, a vacation property in Mallorca, and a collection of vintage automobiles that required quarterly professional maintenance at a cost he had never once questioned. He did not question the $3,200 it cost to service the vintage Porsche. He did not question the 800 bids a month fee for the investment manager who protected his 8.3 million euros. He questioned the 65 call-out fee for an electrician. The outlet in his home office had been sparking for 3 days. Not constantly, just occasionally when he plugged something in. A little fizz, a little pop, sometimes a small visible arc. Wolfgang had Googled this for approximately 4 minutes and concluded it was a loose wire. He had watched one YouTube video titled, "Fix a Sparking Outlet in 5 Easy Steps," which had 340,000 views in a comment section he chose not to read. A comment section which, in retrospect, contained several deeply relevant observations from people who had tried this exact approach and had very specific things to say about it. He purchased a screwdriver set for €8.99 and felt the economic satisfaction of someone who had just beaten the system. Here is what Wolfgang understood about electricity. It comes from the wall, it powers things, and it costs money every month. Here is what Wolfgang had not internalized about electricity. It does not wait for you to be ready. Standard European household current runs at 230 volts and 50 hertz. The human body's resistance varies with skin condition and contact point, but at 230 volts, the current passing through a grounded human being is sufficient to cause ventricular fibrillation. The technical way of saying, your heart stops doing what hearts are supposed to do and begins doing something considerably more alarming, at contact times as brief as 50 milliseconds. Wolfgang was a 61-year-old man with a mildly elevated resting heart rate that his doctor had mentioned at his last 2 checkups. The doctor had not specifically mentioned the 230-volt scenario, presumably because it had not seemed necessary. He did not turn off the breaker. He had located the breaker panel in the basement and determined the walk was inconvenient. He was planning to be quick. He had his reading glasses on for precision. In his mind, the sparking only happened when you plugged something in, not when you were just looking at the wires, and therefore, as long as he was careful and fast, the whole thing would be fine. He was also almost certainly thinking that 65 euros was an absolutely offensive price for someone to drive over and look at a wall for 20 minutes. He touched the wrong wire at 11:23 a.m. The neighbors heard nothing. Wolfgang's body was found by his wife when she returned from grocery shopping at 1:15 p.m. The outlet, investigators noted, had indeed contained a loose wire. It had also contained 230 volts of live current that had been waiting with extraordinary patience for exactly this kind of visit. The repair, had Wolfgang hired the electrician, would have taken 18 minutes and cost 65 euros. The estate's legal and administrative costs following his death exceeded $12,000. His vintage Porsche sold at auction for $87,000 the following spring. The buyer got an excellent deal and presumably called electricians when necessary. If you work with household electrical, always kill the breaker, then verify with a non-contact tester, not your fingers, not your confidence, not the logic that you'll be quick, that the circuit is confirmed dead. Rated tester, verified dead. That is the entire protocol. Now moving on, Germany's entry involved a man who lost an argument with a wall. Our next one involves a man who lost an argument with 2 bottles he bought at the same supermarket, poured into the same sink, in a room that had nowhere for the resulting conversation to go. Number 3, the yacht was called Tatiana. It was 112 feet long, berthed in Sochi on the Russian Black Sea coast. and had cost Dmitry Volkov approximately $4.7 million US, which was, by Dmitry's own reckoning, a reasonable price for something that made other people's yachts feel slightly inadequate when anchored nearby. Dmitry was 58, had made his money in natural gas distribution, a phrase which, in Russia in the 1990s, means something quite specific that we will leave exactly where it is and maintain the yacht with the same philosophy he applied to everything, expensively, personally, and with the absolute conviction that professionals were for people who lacked initiative. The yacht had a full cleaning crew. They came on Thursdays. This was a Tuesday, a party was happening on Wednesday, and Dmitry had spotted what he believed was mineral scale on a bathroom fixture below deck. He could have called the crew back. They would have arrived for approximately $80. He went to the supply cabinet instead, which he considered the more sophisticated option. The supply cabinet on the Tatiana contained several professional-grade cleaning products. It contained a bleach-based bathroom cleaner and an ammonia-based glass and surface cleaner. Both bottles were labeled. Both had warning panels. The warning on the bleach bottle said, in Russian, "Do not mix with ammonia-based products. Toxic gas may form." The warning on the ammonia bottle said, in Russian, "Do not mix with bleach. Produces chloramine gas. Ventilate immediately." Dmitry was not reading warnings. He was solving a problem, chloramine gas, which is what happens when you mix bleach and ammonia. A fact printed on every cleaning product manufactured in the past 40 years, in every language used by every country that has ever cleaned a bathroom, is colorless, nearly odorless, at first exposure, and begins destroying respiratory tissue immediately on contact. It does not announce itself. It does not give you a moment to reconsider. The below-deck bathroom on the Tatiana was approximately 38 square feet with no external ventilation and a door that sealed tightly for storm conditions. Because it was a yacht, and that is a feature, not a flaw, except in situations like this one. Dmitry mixed the two products in the bathroom sink at 11:04 a.m. In his mind, if one cleaner was good, both would be better. In his mind, the hard part had already been done, locating where the crew kept the quality products. Everything after that was just cleaning. He had a window of approximately 90 seconds, during which the gas concentration was building, and during which he might have felt the first burning sensation and correctly understood what was happening. He did not open the door in those 90 seconds. Investigators could not establish why. The party on Wednesday was attended by 11 people who were told, with very little detail, that Dmitry was unavailable. Real talk for 3 seconds. Bleach plus ammonia equals chloramine gas. It is not subtle. It happens in kitchens, bathrooms, boats, and any enclosed space where someone mixes them. Never mix them. Open a window before you open either bottle if you are working in a small space. Out and ventilate. That is the whole lesson. Okay, chemistry had been trying to tell Dmitry something for years, printed on every bottle he had ever purchased. Our next entry involves a man who ignored a very different kind of warning, one printed on an orange sign. A large one, with flashing lights, and a person standing next to it for 3 hours, specifically to prevent this from happening. Number 4. The sign said road closed. Flood waiters. It was bright orange. It was 3 feet high and 8 feet wide. There were 2 of them, one on each side of the road, and they were supplemented by 2 barricades with flashing amber lights and a local council worker in a high-visibility vest who had been standing in the rain for 3 hours specifically, so that nobody would do what Gary Hutchinson was about to do. Gary pulled around the barricade at 3:18 p.m., gave the council worker a wave, a friendly acknowledging wave, and drove his $340,000 Bentley Continental GT into the floodwater. Gary was 47, had made his fortune in Western Australian iron ore, a business that requires a thorough understanding of geological stress, water pressure, and exactly what happens when large bodies of liquid encounter structural materials under load. He had 16 employees, whose jobs involved calculating what water does to things. He understood water professionally. He just didn't think it applied to him personally on a Tuesday afternoon when he was running 20 minutes late to a lunch reservation, and the marked detour would have added $18 in tolls and 11 minutes of driving. 11 minutes. That was the calculation he was making. Here is what Gary had not factored into his 11-minute calculation. Floodwater flowing across a road generates lateral hydraulic force that, at a depth of just 18 inches moving at only 6 miles per hour, barely faster than a brisk walk, exerts approximately 1,200 pounds of sideways force per linear foot of vehicle. The Bentley Continental GT weighs 5,170 pounds. That sounds like enough. It is not enough. A car in moving floodwater does not remain a car in the engineering sense. It becomes, from physics' perspective, a large, irregular floating object with all the navigational control of a very expensive bathtub toy. A Bentley Continental GT, for all its extraordinary craftsmanship, was not designed for this application. The Bentley engineers had not included it in their testing matrix. Gary drove in. The water was deeper than it had appeared from a distance, because floodwater across what usually looks like a flat road is almost never actually flat. The nose dipped. The car was buoyant for approximately 8 seconds, long enough for Gary to almost certainly think, actually, this is fine, and briefly feel vindicated, and then the current got underneath it. You heard me. 8 seconds of vindication. The car rotated. The doors, under water pressure, would not open from the inside under human arm strength. The power windows, as they routinely do during partial submersion, malfunctioned. The Bentley traveled approximately 200 meters downstream in about 40 seconds, partially inverted. Gary did not have a window breaker in the car. He had never needed one, which was presumably also his logic for thinking he could handle this situation. The detour he had been avoiding would have taken 11 minutes and cost $18 in tolls. The vehicle recovery cost $23,000, most of which was not covered by his insurance because the policy contained a provision about driving into water hazards that had been clearly marked as closed, which his insurer considered a fairly reasonable position. That one had a sign. A large, orange, flashing sign and a person standing in the rain next to it. Our next one had nothing warning him except the sound of the chair, which he had decided was not a credible data point. Number 5. There is a very particular energy in a room when the wealthiest person present is about to do something that every other person in the room clearly understands to be a terrible idea, and nobody feels positioned to mention. It is the energy of 14 people simultaneously calculating the ratio of their annual performance bonus to their desire to say the word stop. Kenji Watanabe had generated this energy many times in his professional life. This was the last time. Kenji was 44, had founded and sold 2 software companies, was building a third, and ran his Tokyo office with the specific flavor of chaotic conviction that develops in people who have been right about enough big things that they stop distinguishing between the big things and the small things. He had twos. $4 billion in personal assets, approximately $16 million at current rates. He had a corner office on the 12th floor of a building he co-owned, and on a Friday afternoon in March, during what his assistant had scheduled as a team culture session, Kenji produced a chair. The chair had cost $550, roughly $3.70. He had found it at a secondhand goods market that morning, while walking to a meeting, and had bought it on impulse. His plan was to stand on it. He had made a bet with his head of engineering that a chair costing $550 would hold his full weight while he stood on it, which would prove that quality was a state of mind rather than a function of materials science, which was apparently an important corporate lesson for a Friday afternoon. Nobody had asked for the lesson. Kenji was delivering it anyway. The head of engineering did not take the bet. He had a master's degree in materials science, had looked at the chair for approximately 1 second, and had decided he would rather not be holding the betting receipt when this particular experiment concluded. The chair was a folding model made of what appeared to be, and what subsequent structural analysis confirmed was, steel tubing with a wall thickness of approximately 1.1 millimeters. Standard folding chair construction can, under ideal static laboratory conditions, support around 250 pounds of downward force. Kenji weighed 168 pounds, which sounds comfortable until you factor in that standing on a folding chair does not produce static downward force. It produces dynamic load spikes. The involuntary microadjustments, weight shifts, and balance corrections of a human body standing on an unstable surface that can multiply instantaneous force 3 to 4 times beyond the static load. The chair had also, at some prior point in its previous life, developed a stress fracture in the left rear leg joint that was not visible to the naked eye. It had been waiting, with the patience of stressed metal, for exactly this calibration of weight and ambition. Kenji stepped up. The chair held for approximately 1.5 seconds. 3 of his 14 team members later described the sound of the leg joint giving way as like a very small firecracker. Kenji's left foot went through the seat canvas. His right foot went sideways. He fell not forward, as one might expect, but at a diagonal, and struck the corner of his glass-topped desk at approximately hip height before reaching the floor. The tempered glass top did what tempered glass does, which is to say it became approximately 4,000 small pieces in a single unanimous moment. The lesson his team took from this was not the one Kenji had intended to deliver. The chair, what remained of it, was subsequently identified as a model subject to a 2019 product recall for structural defects. A recall notice that had been publicly available online, that nobody had checked, because nobody had anticipated needing to check, because nobody had expected their CEO to buy a recalled chair at a street market and stand on it to win a $550 bet on a Friday afternoon. Kenji had not won the bet. He could also not be asked to settle it. From Tokyo's Tower of Conviction, we go to Sao Paulo, where someone had decided that professional credentials were a negotiable concept when it came to gas furnaces in enclosed basements, and that the phrase, "I have watched 3 videos about this," was a sufficient alternative number 6. The house in the Jardins neighborhood of Sao Paulo had been featured in a Brazilian architecture magazine in 2019. It was the home of Isabela Monteiro, 49, whose late husband had left her a construction empire worth approximately $67 million, and whose personal philosophy regarding the physical infrastructure of buildings could be summarized by her own frequent description as, "I trust the professionals I pay." She had said this in various forms many times. She had not applied it to her own home on this particular Tuesday, for reasons that remain genuinely unclear, given that she was literally surrounded by construction professionals at all other times. The gas furnace in her basement had been making a noise for 2 weeks. Her housekeeper had mentioned it. Her property manager had scheduled a service appointment for Thursday. It was Tuesday, and Isabella had decided that waiting until Thursday was unnecessary because she had found a YouTube channel that covered this exact furnace model, and the repair looked straightforward. She had watched the video twice, then a third time. She had written notes. Notes which, in retrospect, contained several gaps that the video's creator had described as optional for home situations, a phrase that was doing enormous and unearned work. The repair required isolation of the gas supply, pressure testing after any adjustments, and verification of complete seal integrity before reignition, none of which the video had emphasized, and one of which the pressure test required equipment Isabella did not own and had not thought to acquire. Natural gas is colorless and essentially odorless in its raw state. The mercaptan additive you associate with gas smell is present in very small concentrations, specifically calibrated to be detectable, but it is not a precise gauge. Gas can accumulate in a basement with limited circulation to genuinely dangerous concentrations, well before the smell becomes alarming, especially when the furnace itself has been cycling with a partial seal failure for approximately 14 minutes, which it had been. Isabella had been in the basement for about 20 minutes when she made the second adjustment. In her mind, she was nearly finished. In her mind, the property manager would arrive Thursday to find everything already resolved, and would be pleasantly impressed by her initiative. She reached for the pilot light reignition mechanism at 4:33 p.m. The service appointment on Thursday was canceled by the estate administrators. The property manager rescheduled it for the new owners. The repair Isabella had been attempting would have cost 280 cents. That was approximately $54. Her estate, for the purposes of comparison, was worth $67 million. She died saving 54 of them. Stay with me, because we are only at number 6, and the remaining 4 involve a man who treated professional pyrotechnics as a cost reduction opportunity. A woman with a credential that will make your jaw drop when you hear what she ate for dinner. A man who decided 70 Bs were a manageable DIY project, and one grand finale involving pressure that I genuinely promise you will not believe happened to someone with 16 million pounds in the bank. Real talk for 2 seconds. If you smell gas, do not touch any switches, do not use any flame, do not attempt to find or fix the source. Get out. Call the gas company from outside. That is the complete job description. Out and call. Now number 7, Omar al-Rashidi had, by any reasonable metric, already won. He was 38, had made somewhere in the neighborhood of $90 million developing luxury residential properties in Dubai, and had a penthouse apartment on the 43rd floor with a rooftop terrace that his Instagram account described as living above the clouds, which was accurate in the way that calling the Pacific Ocean a bit wet is accurate. He had 2 million Instagram followers. He understood spectacle professionally. He understood brand. He understood exactly what a rooftop fireworks display at a 400-person building anniversary party would do for both. This is relevant context. Omar's decision was not entirely irrational. It was in fact a marketing calculation. The professional pyrotechnics company had quoted AED 28,000, approximately $7,600 for a 20-minute display. Omar had reviewed this quote and had decided, with the specific financial reasoning of someone who has made $90 million, and now processes any individual expenditure below 7 figures as essentially theoretical, that $7,600 for 20 minutes was not a value he could respect. He found a website. The website sold professional-grade display fireworks, the kind used at actual licensed public events, and the itemized cost of everything he wanted came to approximately AED $9,400, or $2,560. He would sell $5,040. He ordered 2 weeks in advance. The materials arrived in 3 large boxes with several warning labels he described to his assistant as standard liability language. His assistant did not comment. She updated her CV that afternoon. I am not making this up. Professional pyrotechnics at the scale Omar was attempting, 37 individual launch tubes, fused for choreographed sequential effect, require training that constitutes a licensed profession in most countries, specifically because ignition timing, fuse burn rates, and tube spacing must be engineered so that shells clear each other's blast radius before detonating at altitude. Omar's interpretation of the setup diagram was that he should stand near the array and light the master fuse. The diagram's actual instruction in 2 places read, initiation point, professional use only, minimum 30-meter clear distance. Omar was standing at approximately 1.2 meters from the initiation point. He had done the math on the cost. He had not done the math on the geometry. The first 6 shells fired perfectly, and the 400 guests below responded with the kind of enthusiasm that made Omar feel, in that specific moment, completely and correctly vindicated. Shell 7 misfired, meaning it ignited in the tube without sufficient propellant to clear it, which caused the tube to fail at its base. The base failure destabilized 4 adjacent tubes in the rack at the precise moment shells 8 through 12 were mid-sequence. Several things then happened simultaneously that the pyrotechnics company's engineers later described, in their formal assessment requested by investigators, as a predictable consequence of amateur configuration. He had wanted to make an unforgettable impression. Every guest remembered it. The incident was recorded from below by approximately 73 separate guests, several mid-Instagram story. The videos were not available publicly for long. His estate's legal team moved quickly. The pyrotechnics company's original quote, the one for $7,600, was recovered from Omar's deleted email folder and cited extensively in the case documentation. The pyrotechnics company was not named in any proceedings. They had done nothing wrong. They had simply been declined number 8. And here is where it gets genuinely insane. Beatrice Fontenoy was 62 years old, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune worth somewhere between 80 and 100 million euros. And, this is not decoration, this is the entire point, held a PhD in biochemistry from the University of Paris, completed in 1987, with a doctoral thesis on enzyme-catalyzed reactions in fungal organisms, a thesis on fungi, defended before a committee at the University of Paris. She went mushroom foraging in the Fontainebleau forest on a Sunday morning in October. She went alone, which she often did, because she considered herself entirely competent on the subject, which, given her credentials, her decade of training, and her literal doctoral thesis on fungal organisms, was not, on its face, an unreasonable position. She found a specimen she identified as Cantharellus sibarius, the golden chanterelle, a fully edible and genuinely delicious mushroom worth approximately 12 euros at the market stalls she passed every Saturday. She collected it, and 4 others she assessed as the same species and brought them home. They were Amanita phalloides, the death cap, a name it earned completely and wears without apology. Amanita phalloides is responsible for approximately 90% of all fatal mushroom poisonings globally. It contains amatoxins, specifically alpha-amanitin, a compound that is not neutralized by cooking, is not detected by taste, is not destroyed by the digestive system, and does not produce symptoms for 6 to 24 hours after ingestion, by which time it is already bound irreversibly to RNA polymerase II in hepatic cells throughout the liver. The liver does not negotiate with alpha-amanitin. The mechanism is thorough. The timeline is extremely patient. And this compound's properties, its structure, and its clinical effects had been described in papers published in the 1980s. Papers that Beatrice, given her field, her training, and her doctoral thesis on fungal biochemistry, would have encountered. The chanterelle and the death cap share enough superficial characteristics that they have confused amateur foragers for generations. Beatrice was not an amateur forager. Beatrice had a PhD. She had looked at these mushrooms, and she had been confident, and confident is a state of mind. And Amanita phalloides does not take states of mind into account. She cooked them with butter and shallots at 7:30 p.m. Sunday and ate them for dinner with a glass of Sancerre. She felt fine that evening. She felt fine the following morning. She attended an 11 a.m. meeting Monday and was described by colleagues as entirely herself. She felt slightly unwell at 2 p.m. Monday, the kind of slightly unwell that presents as a minor stomach complaint. By Monday evening, the symptoms were pronounced. She presented at the hospital at 9 p.m. Monday. Toxicology results at 1 a.m. Tuesday. There is no antidote for Amanita phalloides poisoning once it is symptomatic. There is supportive care. There is emergency liver transplantation if a donor is available within a narrow window. Neither was sufficient in this case. She had been foraging to avoid spending 12 euros at a market stall. She had a biochemistry PhD with a thesis on fungal organisms, and she identified the wrong mushroom, and she ate it because she was confident, and confidence, as we have now established across 8 separate well-documented case files, does not negotiate with biology. The chanterelle season that year was described by local foragers as particularly good. Her estate donated 2 million euros to the hospital that treated her number 9. The beehive had been established in the garden wall of Peter de Bruin's Stellenbosch estate for approximately 3 weeks when Peter decided something needed to happen. Peter was 55, had built his fortune across South African mining and logistics, and was by every account a pragmatic and decisive man. He had received a quote from a licensed pest control company to remove the hive and relocate the colony humanely for R1,800, approximately $96. Peter found this offensive, not the amount specifically. He spent more than that on wine on a routine Tuesday. He found the principle offensive. It was his wall. The bees were not paying rent. He would handle it. What Peter understood about bees: they produced honey, they could sting, you should move calmly around them and not wave your arms. What Peter did not know, and what would have changed the entire afternoon: the hive had been established long enough to contain a mature colony. Subsequent analysis put the population at between 60,000 and 80,000 individuals. On the larger end of typical, representing a collective defensive mass that does not function like a group of individual insects. It functions like a single organism, one organism with 60,000 stingers and a unified threat response protocol. The specific variety present, African honeybees, has a threat threshold considerably lower than European varieties and a pursuit range that can exceed 400 meters. The colony had also spent 3 weeks building honeycomb against the warm south-facing stone of the wall. They had substantial resources. They were, in the specific language of apiculture, highly motivated. Peter approached the wall at around 6 p.m. on a Thursday wearing a long-sleeved shirt and gardening gloves. He had a can of household insect spray. He had what he described to his groundskeeper as a plan he characterized as just going to give it a go. He was almost certainly thinking about how the sprays had worked on the wasps 2 summers ago. Wasps and bees were essentially the same category of problem. The spray had worked on the wasps. In his mind, this was established technology being applied to a familiar situation. He sprayed the hive entrance at 6:04 p.m. The colony's alarm pheromone, isoamyl acetate, for those keeping notes, travels through a 70,000 individual colony in approximately 3 seconds. The groundskeeper, watching from a distance and later providing a detailed statement to investigators, described what followed as a cloud. Peter ran. He made approximately 28 meters. He was stung, investigators established, over 100 times. The cumulative venom load from that number of stings is fatal to a healthy, non-allergic adult. It is not an allergic response. It is simply the accumulated toxin exceeding the liver's metabolic processing capacity. Peter was not allergic to bee venom. That was the only fact in this entire situation that had been on his side. It had not been enough. The pest control company was contracted by the estate the following week. They arrived in certified protective equipment, applied specialized smoke to calm the colony, and completed the full relocation in 40 minutes. They charged R1,800. They did not comment on what had preceded their visit. They were professionals. That was the difference number 10. The boiler room of the Granworth estate in Somerset, England, contained a pressurized hot water heating system installed in 1998 by a firm that no longer existed, serviced annually until 2019 by a company that very much still existed, and charged £200 per year, and not serviced since 2019 by order of its owner, who had looked at the invoice and decided that annual boiler servicing was a revenue protection scheme, not a legitimate maintenance requirement. Modern boilers, Edward Harwick had concluded, were reliable technology. The £200 was not, he felt, necessary. He had not serviced it in 4 years. The boiler had been making a noise for 6 weeks. Edward was 64, a former hedge fund manager who had retired at 58 with a personal fortune, his own financial disclosures placed at approximately £16 million. He had a gardener. He had a cleaner twice a week. He had a personal accountant and a personal solicitor. He did not have a plumber because, in Edward's estimation, plumbing problems were not a standing retainer category of issue. They were call when needed. He had not called. The noise the boiler was making was a very specific kind of intermittent rattling that any licensed plumber would have identified, in approximately 30 seconds, as a symptom of a failing pressure relief valve, the component whose sole function is to prevent the heating system from accumulating pressure beyond its rated tolerance. Because past that tolerance, the system resolves the overpressure situation itself through whatever structural boundary it can find, in whatever direction presents least resistance. The pressure relief valve had been degrading for approximately 6 weeks. The rattling was it failing to fully perform its function. The system had been building pressure incrementally, daily, with the patience of something that does not experience time the way humans do and does not get tired of waiting. Edward had consulted the internet. He had found a forum post, not a manufacturer document, not a licensed engineer's assessment, not a technical specification, but a forum post, authored by someone who described themselves as pretty handy around the house, that described a similar noise and suggested tightening the expansion tank fitting as a first diagnostic step. The expansion tank fitting is, when the pressure relief valve is functioning correctly, a peripheral component. When the pressure relief valve is not functioning correctly, the expansion tank fitting is the last mechanical constraint between the system's accumulated pressure and the room. These are different situations. The forum post did not distinguish between them. Edward did not notice that it hadn't. The plumber call-out fee in Somerset on a Friday afternoon was £25. Edward went to find a wrench. He was almost certainly thinking about how satisfying this would be. Fixing something himself for the first time in approximately 40 years of adult life, armed with a forum post and a wrench and the specific confidence of someone who had managed other people's financial risk for 3 decades, and therefore understood, at a philosophical level, the concept of calculated decisions. He was almost certainly thinking the forum poster had seemed knowledgeable. He was almost certainly thinking that a retired hedge fund manager was, by temperament and training, exactly the kind of person capable of applying systematic reasoning to a mechanical problem. He applied the wrench to the expansion tank fitting at 3:47 p.m. on a Friday afternoon in November. The fitting, which had been functioning as the final mechanical resistance point for a system operating at 4.8 times its rated pressure, responded to the wrench by ceasing to be a fitting. The pressure, 6 weeks of it, accumulating daily, waiting with the specific patience of physics, expressed itself in approximately 0.06 seconds. The boiler room door was located 11 meters from where Edward was standing. The door opened inward. The door was found in the garden. The garden was 12 meters from the boiler room. This is not a contradiction. This is thermodynamics. If any moment in this video made you wince in personal recognition, and statistically, at least one of them did, the like button is right there, and we are not above noting that clicking it costs exactly £0, dollars, euros, or rubles, and carries no known structural risks whatsoever, unlike almost every other financial decision documented in the past 40 minutes. And if you're considering subscribing, the algorithm already knows you watched all of this. It knows what that says about your risk assessment profile. We're not saying you're in danger. We're saying subscribe, get your boiler serviced, call the electrician, and for reasons that should now be completely clear, do not forage your own mushrooms, just in case.